Today we're going to talk about one of the greatest characters in Indian history. His name is Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur. So Babur founded the Mughal dynasty in the 16th century after conquering northern India from his base in Kabul in Afghanistan. The empire was consolidated two generations later by his grandson Akbar, who was also a really good ruler, and lasted until the end of the mid 18th century, which is crazy. That's almost 200 years, um, when its possessions were reduced to small holdings. The last Mughal, Bahadur Shah II, was exiled by the British in 1857. So, such an interesting life of this interesting character. So, Zahiruddin Muhammad Akbar, born in 1483 and lived till 1530, was a descendant of Genghis Khan. How crazy is that? Who was a warlord from Central Asia who invaded India but founded the Mughal dynasty. He kept a record of his life, now known as the Babur Nama, a fascinating book. In it, we witness him doing things warlords won't do on everything from foe crushing to plundering, head lopping, flaying, impaling, and so forth. One didn't want to give one's enemies the impression that he was soft, let's just say. It's possible, I suppose, to come to the Baburnama and read it as a work of military and political history. There's much to learn about the sieges and catapults and the flanking maneuvers and the realities of leading tens of thousands of hairy, hungry, rowdy, reeking men. These are fantastic achievements in corpse making, that is. But I think the reason that the Baburnama speaks intimately across the centuries, the reason this book has been compared to the diaries of Samuel Pepys, is how intelligent, humane, self critical, and even light souled it is. Published now in a new edition in Everyman's Library, the Baburnama is how Pepys might read if every 50 pages or so he ordered his men to build towers of his enemy's skulls. Babur is charming and surprisingly modern modern on the company page. His name among Western readers deserves to be better known. If you only read one autobiography from a sensitive 16th century warlord this year, make it this one. Babur had back pain, went on boats, he lost things overboard, he broke a tooth while eating, and it was such a bummer. He caught colds, he suffered thieves that someday would steal his gold clasp of his girdle. He threw a punch and dislocated a finger once. He got lost outside at night. He worried about his diet. Quote, "This year I begin to abstain from all doubtful food." Quote unquote. He wept very easily too. He was a lover of jokes and harmless pranks. His mind was well stocked with quotations of all varieties and also with poems. Among the snippets of his verses he summoned to mind an appropriate moment was this one. Quote, "I am drunk, comma, Inspector. Today hand keep your hand off of me. Inspect me on the day you catch me sober." Quote unquote. That's funny. Babur wrote verses of his own, and he was an erudite critic of the form. About one poet he wrote, "His odes are tasty but better flavored than correct." And about another one, he writes, "Not to compose is better than to compose verses such as his." Quote unquote. The historian William Derlimpire, who wrote the introduction for a new edition of the Baburnama, he said he liked games of intellect. About an avid chess player, he wrote, He was madly fond of chess, so much so that if he had met two players, he would hold one by the skirt while he played his game out with the other, as much as to say, "Please don't go." Unquote. A polymath in the Jeffersonian style, Babur cared about architecture, urban planning, gardens, trees, and fresh produce. He prized one variety of plum because it was an excellent laxative medicine. He seized a fort with ladders, and in the stage next sentence, he rejoiced it was a melon season. A friend brought him fresh lotus seeds, which he called first rate, little things just like pistachios. Babur was more than just a Hal than Falstaff, and he didn't like to be around drunken fools. But when he threw a party, it was a memorable one. Quote, people had brought a few beast loads of wine from Noor Valley. Unquote. There's a very funny passage in which he admits, very drunk I must have been, for when they told me the next day that we would have galloped loose rein into camp, carrying torches, I could not recall in the very least. After reaching my quarters, I vomited a great deal. Unquote. Babur preferred the gentler highs delivered by hashish and opium. He relates getting stoned with a librarian. He liked to ingest what he and his friends called confections. Here, typically aside, that day confection was eaten, while under its influence, wonderful fields of flowers were enjoyed. Unquote. He had wives, but admitted to other infatuations. He called the keeping of catamines a vile practice. Yet, at one moment, he admits to falling so heavily in love with a boy that, quote, to look straight at him or to put words together was impossible. Unquote. Lost in his swimming emotions, quote, like the madman, I used to wander alone over hill and plain. Unquote. He was a gifted travel writer. He took note of good cooks and bakers and paper makers. He was a raker of in delights, but as with nearly all travel writers, he's most vivid when a place disappoints. Quote, Hindustan is a country of few charms. Its people have no good looks, of social intercourse, and paying and receiving visits there is none. Of genius and capacity none. Of manners none. In handicraft and work there is no form or symmetry, method or quality. There are no horses, there are no good dogs, no grapes, no muskmelons, or first-rate foods, no ice or cold water, no good bread or cooked food in the bazaars, no hot baths, no colleges, no candles, torches, or candlesticks. Unquote. About Hindustan, he was just getting warmed up. This volume 2 reintroduces to this adroit translation by Annette Susan. This historian, who contributes to the sturdy introduction, notes that Beveridge was the first translator of the Baburnama into English from the original Turkish and was the most unusual Memsahib. Born in England, she arrives in India at 30 and fought for the education of women. She composed her translations over many years. I would read a memoir about the feat. The footnotes are both scholarly and winsome. Babur was liberal and tolerant for his time. There were moments of his forgiveness in the Baburnama of generosity and fellow feeling. But woe to those who crossed him. After barely surviving an attempted poisoning, he pounced on the culprits and detailed wet stuff of his retaliation. The taster I had cut in pieces. The cook I skinned alive, he wrote. One of those women I had thrown under an elephant, and the other shot with a matchlock. Well, a warlord's got a warlord, as they say.